All right, welcome. Today we're going to do something really important. We're going to follow the money, your money to be specific, and find out exactly how the government puts your taxes to work. So let's dive right in.
It's a question we've all asked ourselves, right? You look at your pay slip, you see that deduction, and you just can't help but wonder, where does that cash actually end up? Is it paving a new highway, funding a local school, or maybe just paying off some old debt? Well, in this explainer, we are going to pull back the curtain on that very mystery. The whole story of government spending, why it even exists, really starts with this one big idea: market failure. Just think about it for a second. A private company is probably not going to build a lighthouse, right? Because how would they charge every single ship that sees its light? The same goes for a national army. When the free market on its own just can't or won't provide something that's absolutely essential for society, well, that's when the government has to step in. And that, right there, is the fundamental reason we have taxes in the first place.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this, you can think of the government as having three big jobs, or as one economist put it, wearing three different hats. Each hat represents a totally different way your money gets used. So let's break down what each of these jobs actually entails.
First up, the government puts on its allocation hat. Now, this is probably the most straightforward job of the three. It's where the government takes our tax money and allocates it to build public goods. We're talking about things we all need, but that just don't have a clear profit motive for a private business. This is all about building this shared foundation that our entire economy rests on. And this right here is a perfect example of that in action. Take the Build Better More program in the Philippines. You're never going to see a private company build a small, rural, farm-to-market road. Why? Because they could never make a profit charging tolls on it. But the government builds it anyway, because that little road lets farmers get their crops to the city, which helps keep food prices down for every single one of us. It is a classic case of allocation for the greater good.
Next, the government swaps hats and goes into distribution mode. Look, a pure market economy can be amazing at creating wealth, at making the economic pie bigger. But it's not always great at making sure everyone gets a reasonably sized slice. And if that's left totally unchecked, it can lead to some massive, destabilizing inequality. So the government has to step in to tweak the results, often using progressive taxes to fund social programs for those who need a leg up.
And here's what that distribution looks like on the ground. The Pantawid Pamilyan Pilipino program, or the 4Ps, isn't just a simple handout. It's what's called a conditional cash transfer. And as this PDAS study shows, by tying that financial help to things like making sure kids go to school and get regular health checkups, it becomes a powerful investment in the next generation. It's about trying to break that cycle of poverty. And finally, we have the third hat, stabilization. You see, economies are naturally cyclical. They have these huge booms, but also sometimes really painful busts. During a bust, people and businesses get nervous. They stop spending, and that just makes everything worse. That's when the government has to step in and become the spender of last resort, basically pumping money into the system to keep it from grinding to a halt.
We saw a huge stabilization effort during the pandemic, didn't we? With programs like the Bayahana Acts. The government had to spend massive amounts of money to keep the economy afloat, and that pushed the budget deficit way up to 8.6% of GDP. So now the stabilization job is the opposite. It's about reining that spending in. The current plan is to get that deficit down to a much more sustainable 3.0% by 2028 to ensure our economy stays stable for the long haul. So we've got allocation, distribution, and stabilization. But here's the kicker. Not every country does these three jobs the same way, not even close. The playbook for how to spend public money can look completely different depending on a country's core philosophy. So let's zoom out and compare a few different models. And this table just lays it all out so clearly. On one end of the spectrum, you've got the welfare state, like Norway. They're spending more than half of their entire country's economic output on social services, and they pay for it with high-income taxes. On the other end, you have the minimalist state, like the US, which really prioritizes market freedom and tries to keep government spending lower. And then there's the developmental state, like the Philippines, which focuses its spending on one main objective: rapid industrialization, basically catching up.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth does Norway afford such a massive welfare state? Well, the secret is this absolutely staggering number. They took all their oil money and socked it away in a sovereign wealth fund that's now worth an almost unbelievable $1.9 trillion. And they have a golden rule. They only spend the investment returns about 3% a year. It's an incredible system designed to make sure that wealth benefits every generation of Norwegians forever.
The Philippines, on the other hand, has a totally different strategy. As a developmental state, the #1 priority is infrastructure. We're talking roads, bridges, airports, the whole shebang. The target is to spend 5 to 6% of GDP on these kinds of projects. But without a giant piggy bank like Norway's, the main way to pay for all of this is by borrowing. And that means managing the national debt becomes an absolutely critical part of the job. Okay, so we know the why and the what of government spending. But now let's get to the how. How are these enormous decisions about your money actually made here in the Philippines? It's time to peek inside the budget machine. This little quote from the Constitution, this is the key to understanding the entire process. It means that the national budget in the Philippines is what's known as executive-led. Basically, the president proposes the budget, and Congress, well, they can't add a single peso to the total amount. All they can do is cut certain items or move money around. This gives the executive branch, the president, immense power to set the country's financial direction. And the brain of that whole executive-led process is a powerful group called the DBCC, the Development Budget Coordinating Committee. Think of it as the country's top economic team, all in one room. The Department of Finance figures out how much money is coming in. NITA sets the big picture goals for the country. The central bank keeps an eye on inflation. And then the Department of Budget and Management, as the chair, has the tough job of putting all those pieces together into one coherent spending plan. And this whole thing happens in a clear, predictable cycle every single year. It kicks off with the DBM's budget call, where they basically tell all the government agencies the spending cap. Then, those agencies have to prepare and defend their proposals. The president submits the final budget to Congress, which then debates and passes it into law. After that, the DBM starts releasing the funds, and finally, the Commission on Audit comes in to make sure every single peso was spent properly. Now, to make this whole process more disciplined, the government uses a really smart system called two-tier budgeting. Tier 1 is pretty simple. It's the money you absolutely have to spend just to keep the lights on. Salaries, maintenance, ongoing projects. But Tier 2, that's where things get competitive. This is the limited pool of extra cash available for brand new projects. All the government agencies have to fight for a piece of this much smaller pie, proving why their new idea deserves the funding. Okay, time for our final topic, and trust me, this one is a huge deal. Because there's been a massive shift in how public money flows in the Philippines, a fundamental change that brings the power and the money right to your local community's doorstep. And it's all because of a landmark Supreme Court decision called the Mandanas-Garcia ruling. See, for decades, local governments only got a share of the taxes collected by the BIR. But this ruling completely changed the game. It clarified that LGUs are actually entitled to a slice of all national taxes, and that includes the billions collected by the Bureau of Customs. The bottom line? The funding pie for local governments just got a whole lot bigger. And just look at this chart to see how much bigger. The shift from the old system to the new one meant roughly a 40% jump in the funds flowing directly to provinces, cities, and municipalities in a single year. This isn't just some minor tweak. This is a fundamental earthquake in the landscape of public finance in the Philippines. But, of course, there's a catch. With all that new money comes a whole lot more responsibility. The national government is now handing over control of key services, like local health clinics and agricultural support, to the local level. And the big question, the key challenge that everyone is now grappling with, is this idea of absorptive capacity. Do our local governments actually have the plans, the systems, and the people to spend all this new money wisely and effectively? And that leaves us with one final thought, a question that brings this entire conversation right back home to you, to your community. Billions more of your tax pesos are now being managed directly by your local mayor, your governor. They have more resources than ever before to fix local roads, upgrade health centers, and support farmers. So the real question is your local government ready for that responsibility? It's definitely something we're thinking about. Thanks for joining us.